Shalom, everyone, to Insights into the Weekly Haftorah. This week's Torah portion is Tzav in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, and it is the Shabbat this year before Pesach. So we read a special Haftorah, which I'll get to in a few minutes, but I'll just say a few things about the regular Haftorah for Parshat Tzav. But again, this year we don't read it, and other years we do. So the Haftorah from Tzav comes from Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, the 7th chapter. And at the end, there are two verses from the 8th chapter. And the reason is virtually the entire Haftorah is dire warnings to the Jewish people, how they have desecrated the temple service. And since the Parsha is about the inauguration of the Mishkan in the desert, so the Haftarah always follows a theme in the Parsha. And so the theme is the inauguration of the Mishkan. But here, Jeremiah is warning the people that the temple, which is the prototype of the Mishkan and stood for 410 years. Yirmiyahu is speaking at the end of these 410 years, and he's warning the people that the service has become hollow. It's vacant of deep intent, of sincerity, and that God is warning that even though the temple is the place that God's name is placed, that still God will not spare the temple because of these actions. Like all of these prophecies, if the people would have changed their ways, the temple would not have been destroyed. And since we have a custom that we don't have an entire Haftorah that is going to be, we'll call it negative. So the last two verses are taken from the 8th chapter. And these are very, very beautiful ideas. I'll just read it in English, and then the last verse I'll read in Hebrew. It says, "So says Hashem, let a wise man not glory in his wisdom, nor let the strong one glory in his strength, nor let a wealthy one glory in his wealth. Only in this may one who glories glorify himself, in discerning and knowing me, for I am Hashem, who performs kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the world. For these are what I desire, the word of Hashem." And that last verse is quoted very, very often because God is stating what he wants for the world. So it says, "Ki'im bezot yithalel hamithalel. Haskel v'yadoa oti ki ani Hashem oseh chesed mishpat u'tzedakah ba'aretz ki be'ela chafatzti ne'um Hashem." That God desires kindness, judgment, and righteousness. And the temple and Jewish society at that time had become empty of those qualities. And so that's the warning from Jeremiah, and unfortunately the people did not listen. Now, the Haftorah that we will read this year is a special Haftorah that's always read according to almost everyone. There are a few different customs, but almost everyone reads this Haftorah before Pesach, the Shabbat before Pesach, because the Shabbat before Pesach is called Shabbat Hagadol, the great Shabbos. And part of the reason for that is, as we'll see, is the last line of this Haftarah, which has the word Gadol in it. But it turns out that this prophecy comes from Malachi, the 3rd chapter of Malachi. And it happened, it's a very, very positive Haftarah. There's a little bit of rebuke and warning, but most of it is very, very positive. And there are a number of verses in this Haftarah that are quoted very, very often. And so I want to go through them fairly quickly. So the first one is, it says, Ki ani Hashem lo shaniti. For I, Hashem, have not changed, and you, the children of Yaakov, have not ceased to be. Malachi is in the end of the prophetic era, and all the prophets have a certain amount of rebuke and warning, along with promises of redemption and that God will always honor the covenant. So here, the verse is saying that I am God, I have not changed, and I've assured that you have survived everything that has come upon you. That is true to this day. But this verse is used in a Kabbalistic way, because when we talk about the great contraction at the beginning of creation, as the Arizal explains, that for an infinite God to create a finite universe, there had to be a contraction in order to create the space for a finite world. But there is a disagreement whether we take that contraction as literal or figurative. And all of Chassidut and Kabbalah says that it's the contraction is really from our perspective. And then this verse is quoted, Ani Hashem lo shaniti. I haven't changed from before creation to after creation. It's just in your perspective, there was a contraction of God's infinite being to create a finite world. And there was a contraction, but it wasn't in the essence of God. There was always what's called the Rishimu, the energy of God was never totally taken away. Another verse that is very, very important is, it said that there's we'll call it a machloket, a disagreement between God and Israel. For us to do tshuva, do we have to return to God from our own initiative? Or, as we said, when we return the Torah to the Ark on every public reading, Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva. God, return us to you and we will return. In other words, we need your help. Help us return to you and we will return. And here the verse is what God is saying. And God says, return to me and I will return to you. So here is Shuva Elai, Shuva Elechem. So God is saying, I'm always there to help, but I need you to take the initiative to do tshuva. And it's called a disagreement between God and Israel. Like, who has to start? Who takes the first step in the tshuva process? Another very important idea is brought here is the Haftorah talks about bringing the tithes of produce to the Kohanim, the Leviim, the poor, the widow, the orphan. And here it says something it's very, very unusual. It says, bring the entire tithe to the storehouse. In other words, everything that you're obligated. And let there be food in my house. And test me now, thereby, says Hashem, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour down for you blessing beyond your capability to even handle. There'll be so much blessing. So this is one of the few times that we're told that we can test God. That if we give, even in our day, if we give 10% of our income, or if you're a farmer, 10% of your produce, God says, you can test me, because if you do that, I will rain down blessing on you more than you can even handle. And in Hebrew, it's Harikoti Lechem Bracha Ad Belidai. And there's even a famous song, Hirokiti Lechem Bracha Ad Belidai, Ad Belidai, Ad Belidai, Ad Belidai, Dai, 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 Hirokoti Lechem Bracha Ad Belidai, Ad Belidai, Ad Belidai, Ad Belidai, Die, die, die. So everyone is encouraged to give their tithe, and God says, you can test me, that I'll come through for you. And then we get to the end of this Haftorah, and that's the reason why we read it on Shabbat Hagadol, because at Pesach time, there is a tremendous messianic anticipation that we were saved once in Egypt, and there is the anticipation that redemption will come again in Pesach. So here we know that we have this tradition that before Mashiach comes, Eliyahu Navi will come. Elijah the prophet will return and in a certain way pave the way for the Mashiach to come. And it's really based on this Haftorah. So it says like this. It says, behold, I send you Eliyahu the prophet. This is God speaking through the prophet. Behold, I send you Eliyahu. Actually here, his name in Hebrew is pronounced Eliah. In English, it's still Elijah, but it's in Hebrew, it's actually Eliah Hanavi. Behold, I send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of Hashem. So the word for great is Gadol. And that's why the Shabbos is called Shabbat Hagadol. It's one of the reasons. And it continues. He shall restore the heart of fathers to children and the heart of children to their fathers. So this is such a beautiful, beautiful idea. V'heshiv lev avot al banim, v'lev banim al avotam. That this is the great reconciliation, not just between fathers and sons, it's between families and communities, Israel and the world, before the final redemption. And then it says, and then there's a warning, lest I come and strike the land with destruction. As we know, the prophets always intersperse warning and promise. But then it goes back, because we don't end Haftorah, like we saw that in Parshat Tzav, in a negative way. And so it repeats the same verse. Behold, I send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of Hashem. So this is the Haftorah for Shabbat Hagadol. In certain years, Shabbat Hagadol will not come out on Parshat Tzav, depending on if it's a additional month, Adar Aleph and Adar Bet. And so anyways, this year, this is the Haftorah that we read. We should merit this year to see the full redemption.